He thought closing a $2.8 billion deal would fix everything until he found his maid under his dining table, holding his baby a broken bar and whispering a "Shut up. Shut up," the maid hissed, the two words slicing through the quiet like glass. Marcus Blackwell blinked, shifting from the numbness of the elevator's artificial chill to the dumbfounded heat of his own penthouse. His suit Armani, navy, expensive enough that it had a name in the valet's ledger, was rumpled from another day that felt like a week. The merger had closed, $2.8 billion. The number still tasted like victory and exhaustion. He had pictured the rest of the night with comfortable precision: bourbon, headlines, collapse. Instead, Maria crouched under his dining table, clutching his 7-month-old son as if the child were a weapon and she, a shield. "What the hell?" Marcus started, the question dying against a hard palm over his mouth. Maria's eyes were fierce, wild with panic and a kind of cold focus he'd never seen in her before. "Shut up," she repeated. "Don't say another word." Marcus stared at the hand covering his mouth, at the knuckles flecked white, at the faint calluses you get from hands that do real work. He pushed the palm away as if that could push away the truth of what he'd walked into. "This is my house. This is my child," he said, voice low, clipped, a reflexive reclaiming of status that suddenly felt ridiculous and petty. Maria's whisper was venomous. "Unless you want us all dead." The word landed with the force of a slap. "Dead." Marcus's pulse boxed in his neck. Oliver, bundled against Maria's chest, made a small, sleepy noise. Tiny fists worked the air, unknowing and miraculous. "There are men outside," she continued in a voice made of urgency and a steady, practiced calm. "3 houses down, then 2 houses down. They're working their way up the street. Mrs. Chen's alarm went off an hour ago. Then the Johnsons. I heard breaking glass. I called the police. They're overloaded in multiple break-ins. They said they were responding, but that could be hours." Marcus's brain, trained to make decisions for a living, attempted to catalog: security system, doorman, panic room. He fumbled for his phone. The screen lit up the gloom like a tiny, treacherous moon. "I'm clean. Number." Maria clamped his wrist with a grip that warned him, "Don't. They'll see the light. You don't make noise. You don't move. We stay hidden." Marcus could have told her he had people, security, lawyers, a private response team. He could have said everything he'd ever said to assert his control over the world. Instead, the sounds outside argued with his assumptions: a crash, the shriek of a car alarm starting like some mechanical animal, the far-off shout of someone more terrified than he had been in years. A boot on gravel. Voices. Close now. Someone pounded on the front door. 3 loud, impatient knocks that a polite household would have met with a concerned hello. This house met them in a different way of voices, masked and confident. "Open up," a voice called. "Police." "Open the door." Marcus felt his mouth form a question and then close when Maria's hand flew to his lips. Her eyes were white-rimmed, sharp. She mouthed, "Number." "They are not the police." He listened anyway, the way someone who buys silence so often listens when it cracks. The voice had an edge, a roughness trying to sound official. It skipped a certain syllable in the way Marcus recognized instantly: a Derek Malloy. "Derek." Marcus's skin went cold. "You fired him," Maria whispered. 3 weeks ago. "He's been calling," he begged. "He cursed. He said he'd make you pay." Marcus replayed the last month, arguments in a glass-walled conference room, the evidence that had been threaded like poison through payroll and pension accounts. Derek had stolen $180,000. The board had wanted an example. Marcus had given one. He had expected resentment, maybe lawsuits, some late-night angry emails. He had not expected this. The men outside circled. Voices threaded through the house, rough and confident. "Check the back," someone ordered. "Spread out. Don't let anyone out." Glass smashed somewhere. Something expensive. Expensive enough that Marcus wanted to stand and physically taste the loss. But there was a baby in the room and the smell of Maria's perfume, and the old power hierarchies felt suddenly hollow. "Tell me what you know," Marcus whispered, more to distract than to strategize. Maria's answers came neat and sharp, professional. "They cut power, hid perimeter houses, moved like a wet stain across the neighborhood. They knew habits of the nanny gone at 6. The owner's preference for staying late at events. They'd called and called. Someone had been watching. The house's smart systems, which Marcus paid lavishly to feel safe, betrayed him. Motion sensor cycles, lighting adjustments, a digital heartbeat visible to anyone who knew how to read the code. Marcus thought of all the times he'd minimized Maria, how quickly he'd relegated her to a body that tidied, an invisible presence at the edges. Tonight, that erasure would have killed them, instead it was saving them. Maria had been watching in ways he'd never bothered to. That knowledge shifted something inside him, as something that felt like shame and appreciation braided together. Footsteps became deliberate, boots on marble. A younger voice speculated about the kid. Another, more practiced, demanded that they find Marcus. "We'll make him watch," the young one said, voice like a curse. "Make him feel helpless." A hand trembled down at Marcus's stomach. He thought of Oliver's tiny face, the soft warmth of new life. Maria rocked him, emotion both instinctive and efficient. "Please don't cry," she whispered to the child, as if her plea could rearrange fate. They had no escape through the front or back. The circle tightened. Weapons clinked, and Derek's calm, menacing voice threaded through the house like a promise. "Spread out, to check every room. Don't let anyone leave." The kitchen lights clicked on. In the next wing, the clank of the cellars, the rattle of locks. A safe was found in the living room. Marcus imagined the intimacy of someone rifling through his life via papers, framed photographs, the small tokens he kept in drawers to remember weddings or funerals. These men were not here for nuance, they were here for ruin. The baby fussed. Maria's jaw tightened. "We hide," she said. "Let them take what they want. Your money stuff can be replaced. The child cannot." Marcus felt an emotion that had nothing to do with his bank account, a small, hot panic that someone could rewrite his life in an instant. He thought of the boardroom and the speech he'd make when the sun rose, of apologies shipped with elegant fonts and the price of trouble. None of it mattered in a room with a concrete slab and a sleeping infant. A sound like cracking glass, then an urgent whisper from Maria. "Panic room," she mouthed, "behind the wine cellar." Marcus had a wine cellar that he liked to tell people about at parties. He had never actually been down there. The absurdity of it hurt. The contractor's small talk about safe rooms had been background noise, like the hum of the vac. Maria had paid attention. She navigated past the racks and the labels, her hand sliding along oak as if feeling for seams. There was a mechanism. A section of the wall breathed and swung open like a secret kept for decades. They slipped in as the kitchen's lights flicked over the oak. The room was small and windowless and cold in the way concrete feels. Emergency supplies lined steel shelves, sterile packets, bottled water, a first aid kit so clean it smelled of antiseptic. Maria eased the door closed, and the world outside muffled into a distant thunder. Oliver's little fuss ceased. The change of tone was miraculous. Marcus sat against the concrete and felt the panic recede fractionally. Minutes became a pressure, measured and granular. They listened as boots traced rooms, as men cursed and laughed and broke things with the cruel efficiency of people trained to take. "Where are you?" Derek's voice demanded. "We know you're here." They stayed silent. It was theater, the kind they'd rehearsed on television in 1,000 fictional storms. Except the stakes were real. The radio, a tiny lifeline Maria had found in the emergency kit, crackled with external updates. Officers advised residents to shelter in place. Men like Derek were, by the radio's pale authority, already in violation of the law. The irony was a hard, metallic taste. "How long did you record?" Maria asked at one point, almost conversational. Marcus pulled his phone from the seam of his jacket and thumbed through a file like a man examining his own pulse. 43 minutes. His thumb hovered over the play button, over the voice memos that had buffered proof of everything. Evidence could become narrative, narrative could become prosecution. If the system worked, Derek would be accountable, but systems moved at their own speed. Right now, the only clock that mattered ticked in boots and the tiny breathing of a child. "You said you'd do better," Maria told him later, softer now, as the night pressed around them. The words were not a demand, they were a ledger entry. "Promise made," Det noted. Marcus's reply surprised him. "I mean it." Saying it felt like admitting a balance due. "I'll do better." Maria studied his face with an intimacy that made him uncomfortable and oddly relieved. "She had a degree in early childhood development," she said, "University of Chicago, summa cum laude," she added, A small bitter laugh. Marcus felt the world flip in a new way. The woman who scrubbed his baseboards and folded his shirts had a past he'd chosen not to see. She had cultivated expertise in children's emotional worlds because she knew how dangerous neglect could be, because children absorb fear like a sponge. "You think I'm a terrible father, Marcus," she said after a long silence that was more like an experiment in the limits of their shared humanity. "You're right to say what you did." He hated the way the truth in the room exposed him. "I've been absent. You give money, which matters," she said. "But money doesn't replace presence. Babies listen with bodies. They feel the house as much as they hear it." This night, this fear that will live inside him. Marcus found himself imagining the future in terms he'd never allowed. Not quarterly returns but nights like this stitched into the fabric of a child's life. He imagined Oliver, at 7. Waking with a sweat to a dream none of his suits could fix. Panic wasn't just immediate danger, it was the architecture of memory. Maria's voice was a blunt instrument that hit the place he hadn't aimed at and opened a wound. Above them, Derek's mood changed. The smashing escalated into a systematic cruelty. Prized bottles shattered, family heirlooms annihilated. He wanted to demonstrate power by dismantling the symbols of Marcus's life. "I want Marcus to watch," he told his men. "I want him to know what it feels like to be made small." Gasoline was discussed in the voices beyond. Marcus's stomach pitched as the smell seeped under the door. Sweet, choking, a promise of flames. They could burn the house. They could burn them alive. The panic room's concrete offered limited comfort. No separate ventilation, no extrication plan. The ductwork above looked thin and unpromising. Maria assessed everything like someone trained to find the smallest path to survival. She ran her hand along the vent grill. "Big enough for a person," she said. "Not two." "You're not leaving me with the baby," Marcus said immediately, the old reflex of protectiveness kicking in, vigorous and stupid in equal measure. It was his house. It was his child. Those facts resisted the rearrangement of responsibilities even as his life rearranged around them. Maria's jaw was iron. "You're not risking being the one who leaves him." "I go. I'll get help. I'll get him out." She climbed into the vent with the grim concentration of someone trained in both tenderness and toughness. Marcus became a human ladder, his shoulders bearing the weight of another person's will. Maria moved through the duct like one of the many people Marcus had underpaid in exchange for his life's conveniences. He thought of the names of those minute transactions: laundry, loyalty, expectations, and felt them rearrange themselves into a new calculus. She slipped forward into darkness. For a moment he held Oliver against him, small and warm and fragile, and caught the taste of a vow on his tongue. "If something happens to me," Maria said, looking up into his face from the vent's mouth, "tell Oliver I fought for him." The vent swallowed her. Silence reasserted itself like a pressure trying to smooth over an incision. Marcus listened to faint scuffs and a whisper of shoe leather as Maria moved, then nothing but air and his own breathing and the peculiar, overwhelming responsibility of being the adult in the room. He thought of his life as a set of calculated risks. The merger, the decisions, the people sacrificed at the altar of growth as someone always paid for his ascent. Derek had been the tangible collection of that cost. Now the cost threatened to be blood and fire. Maria emerged farther along the ductwork, near a front window, and pushed a small panel aside that led to a crawlspace. From there she found a maintenance window and a place where the duct ended in a narrow shaft that kissed a service door. From the corner of her eye she saw movement. A shadow passed under the streetlight. Like a gust of night, she slid open the hatch and peered out. Two men in the courtyard argued, voices husky with alcohol and testosterone. One swaggered close to the garage, running his hand along the hood of Marcus's car like a claim staked against a king. Maria waited. When no one watched, she slipped down the external maintenance shaft, an awkward, archaic path that led behind an external air unit. She crawled on hands and knees across gravel, the concrete pressing cold into her palms, and reached a place where her phone sewed a thin ribbon of signal into the world. She held it up, fingers shaking. She dialed 911. "Hello? 911? Her voice was low, practical. "I'm at 12A Beverly in Nob Hill. There's a home invasion in process. Several armed suspects. The homeowner is inside. There are a child and a woman in the panic room. I'm trying to get help." Dispatch listened. slow and bureaucratic and alive. We have multiple calls in that area. Units are responding. Please stay safe. The voice was professional, buffered with the procedures of public safety. Maria relayed the precise coordinates of the house, the description of the vehicle, every detail a dispatcher could take. She had been trained to be precise in the small things that saved people, and tonight those details mattered more than any resume on her resume or any degree on the wall of a life she'd chosen not to claim. She added the most important pieces quietly: the safe room, the presence of a baby, the threat of arson. When the line disconnected, she stayed pressed to the gravel, listening for the telltale rise of sirens. Nothing came, at first, but a faint whine in the distance that could have been one of the invaders' cars. She dialed again and again, refusing to accept silence as the final answer. Back in the panic room, the smell of gasoline grew thicker, the air heavier, as if the world itself had become a creature breathing in to consume them. Marcus's hands curled around the baby-like chains. He could feel the tiny ribs under his palm, the fluttering breath, and something that had been a business plan for a lifetime reoriented. In the dark, the spreadsheet numbers washed away, replaced by the singular calculus of keeping this small body alive. Minutes passed, stretched over an hour's worth of terror. The men outside joked, cursed, broke more things, sounded out rooms like predators mapping a body. Near midnight, the floor above them shifted, footsteps bunched, organized. The men discussed torching the house. Derek's voice was calm when he said it, like anyone setting a plan. Gasoline will make a point. Burn the showpiece. Burn his trophies. Make him feel what he's given us. Maria's hands were small and cold and precise when she returned, a smear of dirt on her cheek, a wild, exhausted light in her eyes. She had the look of someone who had crossed some internal threshold and found a place where fear and duty met and formed a line of action. She had called, she had given coordinates, names, and the siren spaces of bureaucracy. She had reported the vehicle and the voices. She had done everything she could. She had not, it seemed, been able to take the long rope of time from the police. They said units are en route, she whispered when she crawled into the panic room's mouth and closed the hatch behind her. Her voice was fierce and raw. They'll be there. Marcus watched the exhaustion write itself into the angles of her face. He had never seen her like this, not polished, not perfunctory, not part of the need machine that serviced his home. She was real, a person assembled from the places he'd never noticed, a degree in early childhood development, a childhood in East Cleveland where gangs taught her survival, a life composed of small, relentless economizing. She was the accumulation of choices made under pressure and the quiet resolution of someone who would, in a crisis, decide to act. "What's our timeline?" he asked, trying to sound like the man with a plan. His voice surprised him by shaking. She sat down opposite him and looked at him the way someone looks at a machine they know how to fix, with a mixture of professional distance and urgent empathy. "We wait," she said. "We ration air. We listen. We don't make noise. If they get in and find us, we protect the baby." Marcus felt suddenly like a novice again, like someone who had been stripped of all his tools. His suit, the numbers, the neat columns of his life meant nothing here. There was only breath and time and the child. He thought of people he had signed checks for, of contractors and consultants whose advice had been purchased in quarterly retainer fees. None of them had a voice for this night. Maria did. Hours collected like beads on a chain. The men outside grew drunker. They got bored, crueler. They broke more wine, smashed portraits, took pictures of themselves with looted watches, laughed like people who needed to prove dominance to their own insecurity. At times the house seemed impossibly close to collapsing into an endless loop of violation. At times the men's voices were merely a muffled wind. Terror receded into a dull hum and then swelled back up again like tide. At 3 in the morning, the pounding changed tempo. A car door slammed and then the authoritative steps of law enforcement declared Thames Elvesa, the sound of boots with a different cadence. Voices that carried the rhythm of procedure. Marcus pressed his ear to the concrete and heard the difference even before lights painted the floorboards outside. Radios crackled. Someone shouted, "Police, drop your weapons." There was a raw chorus, a shout, then a muttered curse, then the skitter of men scattering. Marcus felt the tension in his body snap into something taut and then unravel. A siren grew like a bright thread through the dark. Voices outside, We have an address." Multiple suspects were reported, but the danger was not yet over. Derek panicked, the men's bravado cracking into terror as they scrambled for exits. Someone ignited a rag in the back, and for a breathless second Marcus imagined flames licking the wall. The smell of gasoline was now a tactile terror. Voices hammered the house as if trying to break its skin. The police shouted commands. The men fired warning shots into the air as they fled. Glass shattered with such force that the noises bounced in his skull. Then, with a brutal and efficient sequence, the police moved